these fantastic authors, and we're talking about YA versus adult and where the two intersect, whatever. If you're not here for that, then leave.
No, stay.
I like it. What has to be saying? What are you saying?
So I will let everybody introduce themselves, starting with Tamsin to my
Of course he is. Of course you are. Hi.
I promise you.
Oh my God, you're right, I don't.
Mike.
Woo.
Oh, it's a good mic.
Hi, I'm Tamsin Silver, and I am a New Mexico-based author. I live in Albuquerque, and I write urban fantasy and historical fantasy. I have a web series out called Sky of the Damned that you can watch for free on YouTube. I know, yay, free. I started doing the book series just recently. In June, Sky of the Damned came out, and last weekend, Hope of the Damned came out. And other than that, I guess that's the most you need to know about me at this time. We'll do more later.
Hi, I'm Jody, Lynn. I write many things, science fiction and fantasy, and for, it would seem, all ages.
I'm Brandon Sanderson. For this panel, I'll be wearing the hat of the guy who's written 4 YA novels and 5 middle grade novels. So, yeah.
I'm Marc Edelheit. I write military fantasy and science fiction, and I'm new to publishing. I published my first book 4 years ago. I've got 10 books out. I've seen tremendous success. It doesn't seem real. One of my series is being turned into a TV show. Keep your fingers crossed. I think we're over the line on it. It's going to be really cool. And I've written a coming-of-age series called Staggered Tales of the Seventh, and it's been one wild ride.
And is that a Dragon Award at the end of the table that I see?
It is.
Why, yes.
No, I didn't win it. I didn't win it.
Right here. No,
He won it.
I couldn't have planned that entry better. Thank you.
We're doing introductions?
Yes.
You're up.
Come on. My name is David Weber, and I just won the Dragon Award.
Yay!
Thank you.
Okay, so my whole background is academic, and I am very much in the school of thought that before we start off any kind of questioning or debate, we have to define our terms. So my first question for everybody is, what is adult and what is young adult? Where are the lines? What is the...
These are
determining
generally
factor?
decided by the marketing people and
You
or
stole
the
my other
librarians.
question, Brandon.
The lines are usually defined by the editorial team under the direction of the marketing team. A friend of mine, Shannon Hale, was submitting her book, The Goose Girl, to Tor and other places, and they said, well, this is YA. She's like, no, it's not. It's epic fantasy. And they said, no, this is YA. We decide. And so she submitted to YA editors, and indeed she sold it. So it is a useful set of marketing categories, but it is marketing more than anything else.
I think from the writer's perspective, I like Heinlein's definition of how to write a young adult best. He said, write it just like you would for an adult reader and leave out the sex and the cussing. Okay?
Well, you don't have to leave that out anymore.
Unfortunately, this is true for some authors, yes.
Hey, sound guy, we're a bit hot up here.
I would... Go a little lower? Too much volume? Oh, okay. I would also say that the biggest mistake people make when they set out to write YA is to write down to their audience. Never, ever write down to your audience.
Well,
you may need to consider vocabulary a little bit if you are deliberately targeting an entry-level reader in the field. But don't dumb it down for them. You're not doing them any service at all. And you are doing a disservice to the field in general and to them as future readers.
That's, isn't there a Seuss or is there a Roald Dahl quote about that, about treating people like adults? Or treating kids like adults?
Well, I think that what you need to bear in mind if you know that you're going to be marketed as a YA writer, or if you're going to intentionally write YA.
Yeah, I can actually speak to that because books that I wrote a while ago, years, wrote for adults, and I have had people say, oh gosh, these are really nice YA fiction. And by the way, there's a third category, and it's right in between. It's called New Adult, which is 17 to 20.
New Adult kind of crashed and burned, though, in the industry.
So. I thought it was
Can confirm.
It just never took off. It's one of those things where, like, trying to make this a thing, it's not going to be a thing. Most of the editors I've talked to in children's right now, by the way, here's some terminology for you. Children's means 18 and younger in the industry. So yes, if you're talking, this is just terminology. So if you say children's books to an editor, it means YA and under. And so most children's editors I've talked to said New Adult just did not work. They couldn't get it to work.
Thank God for that.
Yeah, it was a really weird category.
So artificial.
Some people I'm sure are still trying, but my editor over at Delacorte has given up on it. And so, YA is this interesting thing because, juveniles go back a long time. We have a grand tradition of them in the science fiction and fantasy community. What young adult as a marketing category has had kind of a slow uptake. It's been people have been picking up on it for years and years. So you go to some places, and in the 70s they had separate juvenile sections or YA sections. Where I grew up in Nebraska, there wasn't such a thing. Basically, everything we would call juveniles would be middle grade now, and most of the YA was split between middle grades on the shelves or in adult on the shelves. And I remember getting offended when I found Anne McCaffrey in the children's section. But the librarian said, well, you guys want to read it, so we make sure you can find it, so we shelve it there. I think that the category YA came to rise because of people like me getting offended. You're a teenager. I'm not a kid anymore. And so having a category for teenagers, so it doesn't say children's, so it's not in the children's section at Barnes & Noble, it's outside of it, was a nice move.
So I'm going to politely ask Brandon to get out of my head. Because that's my next question, but we'll move on unless anybody else, do you want to finish your thought?
I'm not sure where I left off.
I was just going to say that one of the things that I think, I write military science fiction, and I write yes, I know you didn't know, okay, but most of it is targeted intentionally at an adult reader, okay? I have certain moral responsibilities as a writer of military science fiction because of the fact that my audience is going to perceive violence vicariously, for the most part, through my books, through TV, through whatever. And therefore, I have a responsibility to deal with it openly and honestly, okay? I think that in some YA, we have gone way, 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 way too far in that respect. We are producing for people who are generally at the most confused period of their life material that says, you know what, the world's even more fucked up than you thought it was. Okay? That type of young adult fiction, there is an audience, there is a need for some of it, but the sheer grind of it can be devastating to a young person who is getting confirmation that all the adults in his life or her life who aren't stupid are malevolent. And I've seen that again and again and again. And I think that we have a responsibility as writers to be aware of the fact that yes, we can't write down to our audience, but we also need to bear in mind where that audience is in the process of developing its understanding of itself and the world around it.
We want to be the anodyne to what is happening around them. We want to be their escape. We are meant to be entertainers. And yeah, kids get a lot of joy from the angst of it all. But they don't have to have everything as a negative example. So yes, we have a responsibility to our readers, as David said, but that is also to elevate them from the trials of the day. The kid who is being bullied doesn't need to read all the time about people being bullied, unless it is to have them find a way out of it. mentally, physically, or otherwise.
How
To
many-
give
how-
them an alternative. We are writing fiction, so give them the best outcome that we can. Yes, absolutely, there are going to be stories with unhappy endings, but they don't have to be morally bankrupt.
How many readers find escape from teenage angst, from being the weird kid on the block, the kid who likes math, okay, the kid whose social skills are, shall we say, not fully developed, okay? Do you need to escape from a life where you are bitterly unhappy into one in which everyone is bitterly unhappy?
Exactly.
I think that is going a little beyond the scope of what we're doing here.
I don't-
Sorry.
I disagree.
So let's just, so we can just move through the conversation. Like, Tamsin, did you have anything?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so my background is in secondary education. I'm a certified teacher. I've taught middle school and high school. And one of the things that, so what I write is, I guess would be technically considered adult because my characters are in their early 20s, but they're, I guess, what would you call it, YA friendly, YA adjacent. One of the, I'm just an editor. One of the, so one of the things that after working with kids as long as I have, I really wanted in mind to focus on, everything they're saying is exactly on. But one of the things I like to focus on is one of the things that people, whether they're in their early 20s like me, really discovered who they were then. So for me, a lot of the YA that I like to focus on is you, either the reader or the character, learning who they are, understanding what they believe in. And for me, that's sort of what I like to focus on when I'm working on it.
Can I add to that?
Oh, please.
You know, one of the great things is that we allow them to dream. So going on with David said, you don't need to talk down to them. They're seeking that escape, that purchase into a new world, a fantastical world. And really, if you do it well, you can build something, and they can come away having learned something from that.
Just move this one down.
Nobody needs to be overly negative. It's that dream. And I remember when I was a teen, going to the bookstore and picking out a book and dreaming of new worlds and stuff like that. So it's, honor hearing from that kind of thing,
$5 for you after the panel.
It's odd to find myself here. I'm going to disagree a little bit, which is odd because in my own writing, I absolutely agree. I like to write things that are optimistic and upbeat, but I'm going to throw out there that I think teens can take a little bit more than perhaps we're implying. I think that there are teens who can read something dark because they want to read something dark, not because they think the world is dark, but because that's fun. I had friends who liked Tarantino films when they were teens, and things like this. And so, while I don't write it, I do want to put out there that I think part of not writing down to them is admitting that maybe some of the teens are going to be interested in things that maybe we think they shouldn't be, but that doesn't mean those things shouldn't be written.
Well,
I have to disagree with you because one of the things I said was they love angst. They like to read things like that.
I do want to build off of that, and I want to say that YA, young adult, is a very recent genre. Like, even me growing up in the 90s, YA didn't exist. You had Goosebumps, and then you just started reading Star Wars tie-ins or John Crichton, for a very personal reference. I think we can all assume that YA started with Harry Potter and
I would
when
disagree with that.
No, when we
No.
okay, we can all disagree because
but
it's
I think
things.
he's saying that's when Barnes & Noble split YA into its own section
Thank you,
in
Brandon.
the bookstore,
Yes.
which is, if we're going to pick an arbitrary point, a pretty good one.
Thank you, Brandon. That's exactly what I'm saying. That Harry Potter was the point where Barnes & Noble decided that YA was a thing.
It's when the New York Times also created a young adult category for Harry Potter
Yes.
specifically, so it is a pretty good benchmark.
And so, like, since then, Tor, to self-promote, we have moved, like, Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. We've moved him into YA and the YA imprint. And Ender is dark.
Yes.
And it's heavy. And so what I want to say is, my question to the panelist is, what benefits do we have of labeling these things as teen stories? And these are stories that you should read as a young adult. I didn't read Ender until I was like 23. That was when I first experienced Ender. But it didn't mean to me the same thing that it meant to someone that I know that read it at 16. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I want to get everybody's thoughts on that.
Phrase the question again, please, because...
So, when the average person goes into a bookstore,
Okay, yeah.
they see the young adult section. At Barnes & Noble, you see this big cross-section of girls and covers, and I don't understand it because I don't acquire for it. But my thing is, what benefits does our genre, science fiction fantasy, have with identifying these are books for teens and these are books for adults? Like, what are the benefits? Why do we do that? Other than this is how we sell books.
One of the benefits is labeling for the young adult that these stories contain protagonists who are their age or thereabouts, usually a couple of years older, and saying, this is not a story about grown-ups who are already established and know who they are. This is a story about you, potentially. This is a place into which you can put yourself. No longer a child, not yet an adult. But it also helps to handle those situations, those threshold moments that are constant within the time of adolescence. And it doesn't stop. And if it's well done and tells a great story and makes use, one of the troubles that I think teenagers have today is they don't feel as if they're being challenged in a useful way. So these are pointing to stories that say to them, this scratches an itch that you know you have, but you can no longer find it in children's books, and adult books don't speak to you, really.
I work for Barnes & Noble part-time. It's a great discount, sorry.
I'd have no money if I worked for Barnes & Noble.
Oh, I don't. What I love about the fact there's a YA section is that we get kids that'll come in and they are junior high or junior high into high school, and they have this deer in the headlights look because there's all this stuff, and they're like, I don't know, I love to read, but I don't know what's good for me. And you can actually take them to a section and go, here is an area for young adults. This is for you. Go through here and here. I'll recommend a few things. What do you like to read? And we've all been trained to pull things for, what they might say. And it's really wonderful to watch their eyes light up when they see there are books for them. And it helps bring a lot of kids who might not normally read into that world. And I love watching them discover things. And then they start coming back and I recognize them at my register. And they come back and I'm like, and you have more, and you have more. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about YA in the bookstore.
Yeah, historically, if you ask editors where's the big dividing line between YA and adult, it's harder to pin down than, as I said at another panel, the line between middle grade and YA. And it's really illustrative to know the difference there. That generally librarians and editors will tell you that middle grade books are handed to a kid and said, hey, read this. That's what that means. They are ones that their gatekeepers are handing to them. The transition from middle grade to YA is where they decide they want to start picking the books, right? But I think these answers are really good because one of the toughest things in any field of retail that you have is what we call decision paralysis, right? And bookstores have it way harder than most things. If you go in and you're like, I'm gonna pick a book, how many different titles are there on the shelf for you to find? In some ways, genres are bad because they encourage you to read what you've read before, and I think everyone on the panel, probably everyone in the room would agree it's good to kind of get outside your comfort zone, read other things. This is going to teach you new things. It's part of why we write, is to expose people to new ideas and things like this. But there's a necessary evil, which is when you walk in and there are 300,000 titles, most people will just lock up at too many titles and will walk out
Yes.
if you're given too many options. This is actually a really common thing for people who come from Europe to America. Americans like more choices on their menus than Europeans do. And it's really hard for them to choose meals the first time they're in America. It's just an American thing.
The sweet spot is between 3 and 5
Yeah,
choices.
exactly, 3 and 5 choices. And so creating a YA section was so those kids who wanted to choose their own, but then were suffering decision paralysis, had a place the booksellers could point them.
I think it's also a place where parents who are unsure what's appropriate for their kids can direct their kids to that section and say, go read. But then again, you look at Ender's Game.
I have to, as the person, I think, am I the only one who's been published by an actual YA-only publisher
I
here?
have been published by a publisher who has published YA for the first time.
So YA is not edited for content. Just get that out of your head. YA is not edited for content.
I don't think most parents realize that. I think
They might not.
I think they think that it's an appropriate section for their kids. And as I was gonna say, you look at Ender's Game where it's like, mass extermination of
Right.
an entire race.
Ender's Game is
Genocide.
okay.
And,
I-
yeah.
But
I
yes.
walked into the Greenville County Library many years ago and found Honor of the Queen in the YA collection. And I looked at that and I said, and I picked it up and I walked over to the librarian on duty. And I said, look, I don't know if you're aware, but this book contains some pretty graphic rape consequences and murder and everything else. And I'm not sure all parents would think it was appropriate to read. And she swelled up like a toady frog. She was like, well, who are you to decide? And I said, the author. And she kind of went, oh, Now, when I was a kid growing up, my parents did not worry about what I read at all. My mom was a literature professor, but she didn't actually read for pleasure. My dad, the blue-collar boy from the south side of Chicago, was the one who read for pleasure. But their theory at that point, and bear in mind that we are talking about a time 5 decades ago, their theory at that point was that if I was ready to handle the concept I had in the book, then I would be fine, and if I wasn't, I would go until I came back to it later. Even adult literature at that time did not have in it some of the stuff we're putting into YAs today. I am the father of 2 18-year-olds and a 17-year-old. And it is bemusing to me and to Sharon, both of whom are bookaholics, that they do not read anywhere near as much as we did as kids. But that's because they have so many other media available to them that we did not have. However, we have made it a point to stay at least, moderately aware of what they are reading. And I have to tell you that the girls, about 4 years ago, went on to Amazon looking for books, and they were looking for a romance. And they hit a category of romance that they were not ready to be thinking about, and they ordered 2 or 3 of them from the titles alone. And they arrived, and they looked at them, and well, they did, and they opened them, and then they went upstairs to their mother's room, and they said, Mom? And she said, yes, and they said, please don't kill us. But we think we ordered the wrong books. And she took one look and said, and so do I.
So I think that
I want to make it clear though, I'm not advocating for this. I'm just trying to define how the editors see it. My books tend to be very much on the more conservative side in these regards. It's what I like to write, it's what I like to read. But people need to know how the editors are viewing this, and except for specific lines, like Disney will edit for content even in YA. Most editors do not edit for content in YA.
I want to take this whole thing because I think it's a fantastic angle and I want to build off of it. And so my whole thing is that when it comes to crossover YA and just fantasy in general, there's a lot of people that get shelved, I guess is the best phrase of that, as YA, and disproportionately it's women who are writing fantasy and writing very graphic fantasy. The one that pops to my mind is R.F. Kuang's Poppy Wars, and there are people that are selling it as YA, and it is not appropriate for children.
I'd like to put in Connie Willis's The Doomsday Book, which was published first, anyone remember this? With a beautiful white cover with an inset of a fairy tale castle. Anyone who's read the book knows perfectly well it's an apocalyptic story.
Oh my
So-
goodness.
And copy after copy after copy was returned by shocked parents.
Said
There they go.
motorcycle. So my question, I guess, to the panel is there a line of maturity that you cross that goes from YA to adult, and why do perceptions shape that? Is it just general SFF, like women can't write hard fantasy, women can't write hard science fiction?
There is a stupid view that there is a stupid group of people out there who think that women can't write hard fantasy or military. Okay, it is a leftover from. It's just wrong. Okay, I mean just wrong. That's all I can say.
I'm going to put together a gang of us women writers who, yes, indeed, we can.
Well, and the number of women writers who succeeded at it because they were using their initials or because they had an andronym, yes, it's late on Sunday, name that, male, female, who can tell?
My goodness, how androgynous is Elizabeth Moon?
Yeah, well, okay.
But I've heard her talk about this. She had troubles early on with readers, and I heard her tell a story where until they put that she'd been in the military in her bio, no one would read the books.
That she was a first lieutenant of the Marines. Yes, exactly.
Well, I know. I was Jim when he was buying the Deed of Paxenarian. It is, and when it first came in, he was like, but he read in her bio information before he even looked at the book that she had military background. And it did not make him like the book better. It made him feel that she was marketable at that point, at that time, okay? And it is, I think, a mark of where we are now, that if you're following like what Chris Kennedy is doing and Casey Azale or some of the others, we now have young female writers who are breaking in the fields that once upon a time it was like guys only can play here. And I think that's wonderful. Going back to the content aspect.
Yeah.
I think that it is the nature of the dark content that you put in is important to deciding whether or not it's appropriate in a YA. Okay? For example, it is totally appropriate to write a YA in which the clouds of doom are overwhelming and they're closing in, just as you would for an adult novel where the task of the protagonist and the cast of characters is to deal with the doom. Very few adults really like a book in which you get to the end and they all died. Okay?
And then they die.
Yes, and then they died, the darkness rolled on, unchecked, and devoured the universe. Yeah, the end. So there's no reason why we should write those for young adult readers, okay? But young adults can handle the notion that, you know what, this is getting really dark, all right? That, I think, is constructive for them to deal with. It's for me, and I mentioned this before, but it's my personal bête noire. It's the acid that corrodes the soul of the reader that you don't need in the book. Okay?
Great line, David.
Right?
I just made it up. I work with words.
You must be a writer.
Are you a writer?
Yeah, I should be. I thought about that from time to time. But that is what I hate. And what someone like Robert Heinlein, who was writing YAs before we ever had a marketing category for them, never had. How many of you have read Have Spacesuit Will Travel? Mother Thing dies.
Yes.
Okay? The kid in the spacesuit is dying. He's taking the codeine because he's trying, it's all he's got, as he goes, and he's not giving up, but he's not going to make it. You know he isn't going to make it.
The Only Neat Thing to Do by James Schmitz. Both characters Spoiler alert, they don't make it.
Yeah. Podcane of Mars.
Oh, yes.
Okay, now I personally think the editor was right. I know that puts me in the minority, but I think he was right to at least leave the possibility there for Poddy's parents to find a degree of redemption.
I think what you have there is necessary violence or necessary deaths instead of the way that adult writers can do it, which is bodies here, bodies there, wipe out an entire population of this.
Okay, again, I write military science fiction. Some people who write military fiction understand that you cannot possibly write combat as bad as it is. And so their response is to write it as bad as they possibly can. Okay? When you do that, you do a couple of things, but one is that you desensitize the reader. The reader is no longer really aware of the horror. There are some readers who'll go, oh boy, I love this. They're the guys who read splatter porn, and they're not the ones that I'm really interested in writing for. But at the same time, you can't not have the violence in there, and you can't not have the consequences for the human beings who are confronting the violence. So I tend to hit you between the eyes every once in a while with something that will just bring home to you that this is, oh boy. Okay, but for the rest of the time, I don't have a need to detail every severed artery. Okay?
No, Tamsin, Marc, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, going on what David's saying, there's a line that you can very easily cross as a writer, and if you're writing to like a coming of age story that's in the YA, and there's a battle, and I've written it in Steiger Tales of the Seventh. You can make it pretty graphic, but if you make it too graphic, you cross that line, and then it becomes an adult novel. And as a writer, you want to be very careful of that because you need to be conscious of who's reading it. Like back home, half of the football team they're reading my books, which is just surprising at our high school. And but as David said, there also always has to be a consequence, because if you have your character and they kill somebody, there is a real world consequence to that. And if you talk to people that have served, that have done it, they talk about how it affects them years later. I used to have a history podcast called 2 Cent History, and I did an episode on the Battle of Britain, and I interviewed pilots who flew there, both on the British side and on the German side. And all of them had stories that resonated with them today about how, when they knew they had killed somebody, how it affected them. And so you've got to have that consequence. But at the same time, if you're writing for a young audience, there's got to be some type of boundary that you as the writer have to be conscious of, and who you're writing for. Because war, I write war, David writes war. It's a big word.
That's a good genre.
Yeah.
If you haven't picked it up, you should really